Hey everyone, Leslie Rice here, creator of The Signal and Terra Obscura with a few announcements. First off, I know everyone's hungry for the next full episode of The Signal, and it's certainly on the way. Thank you all for your patience, as my absence has largely been due to some unfortunate personal matters. That aside, our subreddit, r/signal horror fiction, is now up and running again. I'll be bringing back our monthly Best of contest, and now all winners and runners up will receive the offer to have their stories read as part of a monthly bonus episode for our Patreon contributors. Don't despair though, as selected stories will also be aired live during episodes of Twitch of the Death Nerd, our twitch.tv channel, which can be found under the name Signal_Obscura. Also, The Signal, Tainted Worlds, the new tabletop RPG based on our podcast, is currently in alpha testing and will be released soon. We're learning a lot with each new test of the system, and anyone interested in assisting us will receive a free copy to work with. And that brings us to our final announcement and the subject of today's release. Last year, I took on a project by a new author with some interesting ideas, Ian Q. Malcolm. Ian was kind enough to let me narrate his debut novel, The Draxler Program, the tale of a prison convict who takes a long shot at freedom only to find that his odds may have been better facing his term. With his generous permission, I am happy to bring you, over the next few days, the first 3 chapters of the Draxler Program, available right now in ebook format and in audiobook. These 3 chapters are on us, but you may want to go out and buy the rest of the audiobook. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Chapter 1. The problem with most of the monumental moments in life is we don't realize they're occurring in the moment. That wasn't the case as I sat down in that musty office lobby. I had been informed that this would be my last and only chance to save my mind, and one wrong word could seal my fate. The only thing I wasn't told was how they could help me. "All right, Mr. Rivers," the chirpy woman behind the desk said to me. "Your counselor's ready to see you now. Please follow me." She led me through a door to a hallway where the offices were located. Offices was too generous a word. Based on the unimpressive size of the hallway, and the fact I had already passed 14 doors since entering, the offices that lay on the other side of their respective doorways couldn't have been much bigger than glorified cubicles. The secretary stopped at the last door on the left, and proceeded to rap softly on it with her knuckles. Her body was blocking the nameplate on the door, but I was able to read the number that was posted on the plywood door in tacky gold plastic. For all the technological advancements we had made in my lifetime, the fact that the interior of this program's building appeared to be stuck in the 1960s spoke volumes as to where it stood in the list of governmental priorities. The last DMV I had stepped inside had been in rural Idaho, and even they utilized holograms. Although the people here might want to help me hang on to my mind, I doubted they had the resources to do me much good. "Hi, Inara," the secretary said as the door swung open. "Mr. Rivers is here to see you." She then turned to introduce me to my counselor. I couldn't help but notice the secretary switched her name from Inara to Miss Sanchez during her introduction. It irked me, the fake formality of it all, but I knew I couldn't let it show. I would need to charm the shit out of this lady if I had any chance of avoiding the washer. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Rivers," Miss Sanchez said as she shook my hand. "Please, Mr. Rivers was my father. I go by my mother's maiden name, Foxwell. I'm sure that's somewhere in the file you have on me." She took in a sharp breath of air. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rivers, but I'm afraid you never legally changed your name to Foxwell. As a part of the program you'll be offered a chance to enroll in today, it's important that we stick to the truth. Unfortunately, that means I'm not allowed to refer to you by that name. I'm terribly sorry, but you'll soon understand why we have to do things this way." "I understand," I said as I tried not to grimace. "Pete is my real first name. Can you refer to me by that name?" "Well, that's not true either, now is it?" she said jokingly. "Your real name is Peter. However, Pete is one of the acceptable names listed in your file. Please, have a seat." She gestured to the chair that sat across from her desk. As I sat down, I tried to size up the room in order to find something in common we could talk about. All the information I had gathered up to this point was from her slight Midwestern accent. However, it didn't feel right. Her voice felt as though it wasn't supposed to go with her appearance. She had dark hair, and her complexion appeared to be clinging to the last bit of a tan for dear life. Her whole vibe felt much more European than some small town in a random flyover state. "You probably have a lot of questions," she said. That might just be the biggest understatement I've heard in years. She didn't respond directly to my joke. However, she cracked a smile before she continued with her spiel. I made a mental note that she enjoyed occasional sarcasm, but I needed to be careful not to overdo it. "I'm not sure you're aware of this due to the lack of information you can access while in prison, but certain members of society, namely those in the behavioral psychology community, have been pushing the government for reform of the prison system." "It's good to hear that someone's fighting for me," I said as I flashed a grin. "That makes two of us," Miss Sanchez said. "As I was saying, with enough pressure applied on the right people, coupled with some heavy investment from the private sector, the Criminal Behavior Reform Program was born. The program is more commonly known as the Draxler Program, as it was created and led by Dr. Earl A. Draxler. Neither the official name nor egotistical nickname were the catchiest program names I had ever heard of, but I was sure having a cool name wasn't at the top of their agenda. The idea behind the Draxler program is that if we can help criminals like yourself resolve the problems that led you to commit crime in the first place and break the habits you developed as a result, then we can enable you to rejoin society without posing a threat to yourself or those around you." I admittedly didn't know much about behavioral psychology. For some reason, the program reminded me of the old dog training books my mother had been obsessed with but never seemed to actually use. "Just out of curiosity," I said, "how successful has this program been? I've never heard of it before. I'm not the first person you guys have tried this on, am I? No offense, but becoming a human guinea pig isn't high on my to-do list." "The program started a little over 5 years ago, and we've been carefully selecting a handful of candidates every year. We've also tried to select from a wide range of criminal backgrounds to understand which people are more likely to succeed in the program. The rate of success varies depending on which type of criminal we're talking about, and in all honesty, the sample size isn't large enough yet to draw any firm conclusions." "Let me guess," I said as I leaned forward in my chair. "The pedophiles and mass murderers have been making your sample size less appealing to the general public." "We don't have to worry about the general public's opinion for another 5 years, but there are some higher-ups in the Department of Justice we have to report to from time to time. In case you're wondering, they shot down any possibility of us trying to reform a pedophile, and they're remarkably strict on which murderers we can work with." Although I had a history of bumping heads with the Department of Justice, this was a decision of theirs that I could actually support. Shit, I guess prison does change people. Though the desire to keep pedophiles locked up is a pretty easy way to find common ground with almost anyone who possesses a brain. "So, what about criminals like myself?" I asked. "What is your batting average with confidence artists?" She smiled at my question, as if she had a quiet pride in what she was about to say next. "When it comes to people like us," she said, "we're batting 3 for 3. "People like us?" Her comment took me aback for a second. "Yes," she said. "You heard me correctly. I used to be a con woman, and I was one of the first people admitted into the program." "No shit," I said partially in disbelief. "No offense, you just don't strike me as the criminal type." Her response filled the void I left behind. "Don't worry, I don't find that offensive. It kind of proves the point of the program, though." I guessed her point made sense. I mean, if the point of the program was to make former criminals into normal, well-adjusted people, then not being able to imagine someone as a former criminal would be a step in the right direction. "Phew," I said as I pretended to wipe sweat off my brow. "For a second there, I thought you would never forgive me." "You can count yourself lucky this time. My position doesn't always allow me to be the most forgiving person." Although she said it playfully, I got the feeling she was telling the truth. I etched the note in my memory bank for further notice. "If you don't mind me asking," I said, "what led you to being a con woman?" "The same reason most crimes are committed," she said. "Survival." She grabbed a framed photo off the desk, which I hadn't noticed earlier because it had been facing her, and handed it over to me. The photo was of a young, dark haired couple sitting in what appeared to be some type of public park, and the man had a young girl, probably no older than 3 years old, sitting in his lap. Very cute, I said. I take it this is you with your parents? Yes, she said. That picture was taken of my family before we immigrated to the States from Spain. Life for us was pretty good for our first few years here, but then, well, to make a long story short, things just fell apart. My father was killed in a car accident when I was 7, and my mom and I struggled without him. Things became even more difficult for us when my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. I'm sorry, I said. Part of me wanted to reach across the desk and touch her hand in a sign of support, but I thought better of it. I know what it's like to lose a parent at a young age, but I can't begin to imagine what it must have been like to lose both of them. Thank you. To finish answering your original question, I started conning people as a way to make ends meet when my mom got sick and couldn't work as much. Obviously, her passing didn't make things any better, and I spiraled out of control. Well, at least until I was enrolled in the program. There it was again, the program. The way she said it was as though she believed it was a miracle sent from God. Although it wasn't necessarily a red flag, it certainly piqued my attention. As a former confidence artist, I'd come to learn that if something sounds too good to be true, then it is almost guaranteed to be false. That's the thing about cons. If it's not happening to you, then they're easy to spot. However, if you're in the crosshairs of a remotely good one, then you can get hooked before you know it. You might ask yourself if it's too good to be true, but your answer will be no. Because, let's face it, you're special. If anyone deserves a break this good, then it's you, and you jump in with both feet like a toddler playing in a puddle. I wasn't sure if Inara was trying to con me, but I figured I'd learn more about the program before I jumped to any conclusions. About the program, I said. I'm glad to hear it worked for you, but how exactly does it work? Is it a buddy system, or is it a Pavlov's dog sort of deal? It's a little more complicated than that, though, in all honesty, the answer is a bit of both, along with some other stuff. However, our aim isn't to condition you to drool. Well, that's a relief, I said, but her use of the incredibly technical term other stuff was a bit concerning. The program itself takes 3 years to complete. During that time, we'll be focused on you breaking the habits associated with your crimes, confronting and resolving the root of your problems, demonstrating your worth to society, and keeping you highly motivated. Look, Inara. May I call you Inara? Certainly, Pete, she said. If we're going to be working closely together for the next 3 years, then there's no sense in remaining overly formal. Everything you've said so far sounds great, but you've given me next to no information. I need certain questions answered before I can feel comfortable joining anything. Like, what am I going to be doing over this 3 year period? Who determines if I succeed in this program? And what are the consequences if I were to fail? Despite my questions, she continued to smile politely at me, and I began to wonder if her cheeks were beginning to hurt from smiling for so long. Those are all valid questions, and I was working my way towards answering all of them, she said. As a con man, your main criminal habits are lying and manipulating people. In order to break these habits, you'll be working as a tour guide for the next year. A tour guide, I asked. The words slipped out of my mouth before I could mask them in the right tone. That seems a bit silly. Trust me, I've been in your shoes, and I know how ridiculous it sounds, but it does work. Think about it. Seriously, think about it. What does a tour guide do? I'm pretty sure they just walk backward and try to make things sound better than they are so people buy stuff. Oh, so close, Pete. You've got the walking backward part correct, but the rest of it you've mistook for a salesperson. Ugh, what's the difference? She repositioned herself in her chair. A salesperson is trying to get you to buy something. A tour guide, on the other hand, presents you factual information in an enjoyable way with no concern for whether or not you buy into something. It still seemed a little ridiculous to me, but I saw no point in beating a dead horse. Okay, I said, so after I'm done with my stint as a tour guide, then what's next for me? Am I off to a homeless shelter to feed the needy for a year to teach me humility? She clicked her tongue at me. Mock the process all you want. Just remember that it's the only thing right now that has a chance of preventing your scheduled chemical lobotomy. That must have been the highly motivated part of the plan. For my crime of accepting millions of dollars from state and local governments, I had been awarded 15 years to contemplate my actions in a high security prison, and the added bonus of having my brain washed before being returned to society. As of this moment, I had 9 years, 7 months, and 13 days before I would be chemically turned into a human robot. As for what would happen after you successfully replace your criminal tendencies with healthy ones, I can't say with 100% certainty, she said. Normally, what would happen at that stage is you would be transitioned to a new role, one that builds on your new habits while also addressing the root issue that led to your crimes. Since your root issue is your relationship with your father, we would normally have you work directly with him to resolve the problem. As much as I didn't want to laugh, I couldn't help myself. It burst from me like water shooting out of a broken fire hydrant. I'm sorry, I said as I brushed a tear from the corner of my eye, but there's no way that's going to work. That fucking abusive bastard is the problem, not me. Trust me when I tell you there is no amount of therapy in the world that could change that monster. Oh my god, she said as her eyes bugged out beyond anime proportions. Has no one told you? Has no one told me what? I'm sorry you had to hear this from me, but judging by your reaction, this might not be horrible news. Your father, he's dead. The news of his death stunned me into momentary silence. She was right. I wouldn't classify it as horrible news, but the death of a parent is never good news. Despite all of the horrendously shitty things he had put me through, there were a few nice memories sprinkled in there as well. However, this was not the time for me to dwell on the pros and cons list that had been my father's existence. That would have to wait for another time. Shit. It was the only word I could produce at that moment, and was also the most apt word for that moment as well, for it described both his character and my mental state upon hearing the news. I'm sorry, she started to say, but I cut her off. There's no need to apologize. He's been dead to me for a while. She didn't appear to know what to say, so I continued in order to fill the silence. So let me get this straight, because the way I see it, I have two choices. Either I say no to the program and I get shipped back to the high desert state prison to wait out my days before getting my chemical brain bath, or I can try my hand in this program and possibly retain both my brain and my freedom. Correct, she said. And the worst case scenario is I fail the program and have to go back to prison to wait for my sentence to be completed. She bit her bottom lip. Kind of. There is one downside to failing the program. A downside? I knew this was too good to be true. I perked up in my seat a little and braced myself for the program's flaw. If you fail the program, then you won't be allowed to finish your prison sentence. You'd be washed within a week of your failure. As she scanned my face to gauge my response to the news, I did my best to put on a poker face. All of this changed my options some. It didn't truly change what they were. I could either get lobotomized in 9 years, get lobotomized sometime in the next 3 years, or not fuck up and walk away with my freedom. The choice was an easy one. I guess I'll be taking the red pill then, I said. Thank you for listening. Again, the Draxler program is currently available in ebook format and in audiobook. Thanks again for your support, and I'll see you next time on The Signal.